Stop what you are doing, because what is about to happen in the next 24 hours is not something you want to sleep through. June 8th, mark it, write it down, because the last quarter moon in Pisces is not arriving quietly, and it is not arriving gently, and the people who understand what it actually is are going to move through this day in a completely different way than the people who have no idea what is about to hit them. And here is the strange part. You have already been feeling it. Something has been off for days, not bad exactly, not good exactly. More like the ground beneath your life has been slowly, almost imperceptibly shifting, like a pressure building in the walls of your reality without a clear source. Like something large is very close to arriving and your nervous system has already registered it even though your conscious mind has not yet caught up. That is not anxiety, that is perception, that is you picking up a signal that is real. The signal is the last quarter moon in Pisces, and on June 8th it delivers. If you have felt that restlessness building in the last few days, that specific feeling like something needs to change but you cannot name exactly what, type 777 in the comments right now, because what you have been sensing is the wave and the wave is almost here. Now let me tell you what is actually happening astrologically, because this is not vague spiritual energy. This is precise, this is surgical, and understanding what it is changes everything about how you receive it. The last quarter moon in Pisces forms a waning square to the Sagittarius Sun on June 8th. In astrology, this configuration is called the crisis of consciousness. That phrase sounds dramatic, but it is exactly accurate. A crisis of consciousness is the specific moment when what you know at the soul level and what you have been doing in your outer life are forced into direct contact with each other, and the gap between them becomes impossible to ignore. The square creates friction. And friction is not suffering. Friction is the force that produces resolution. It is what breaks a static situation open and forces it into motion. But what makes June 8th different from an ordinary waning square is Pisces, because Pisces does not just create pressure, Pisces dissolves. It is the last sign of the zodiac, the place where all fixed forms become permeable, where what was rigid becomes fluid, where structures that have been holding their shape longer than they were meant to finally and completely release. The Pisces last quarter moon does not build slowly toward a gradual shift. It finds the exact release point of whatever has been compressed in your life, and in a single moment the pressure becomes motion. The way a dam does not slowly weaken and then erode. It holds and then it breaks and the water moves. That break is June 8th. This is the shock wave, and it is already in motion, already moving through the lives of the chosen ones it was sent for. Already organizing the specific circumstances in your life that are going to look very different on the other side of this day than they do right now. Now here is what nobody is telling you about this particular lunar event. The last quarter moon in Pisces is the most underestimated phase in the entire lunar calendar. The full moon gets the attention, the ceremonies, the rituals, the content. The new moon gets the intention setting. The eclipses get the reverence and the fear. And the last quarter moon moves through the collective almost invisibly, doing work that none of the other phases can do, work that only becomes visible in the moment after the shock arrives, and you look back and understand that everything that just shifted was always going to shift on exactly this day. It was always going to be here, it was always going to be this fast, and the only variable was whether you were watching when it arrived or whether it found you with your back to the water. Turn around, the wave is here, and what this wave is carrying toward you is not a problem. It is not a disruption in the way that word usually carries its weight. What the June 8th last quarter moon shock wave is carrying toward you is the specific freedom that has been on the other side of three things in your life that have been holding their form past the point where holding that form still serves you. Three things that have been compressed, three release points. 3 moments on June 8th when the Pisces dissolution withdraws the energy that has been keeping them in place, and they simply, completely, and irreversibly move. Let me tell you what those 3 things are. The first thing the wave breaks open is the structure you built to survive a season that is already over. Think about what chosen ones do when hard seasons arrive. They adapt. The intelligent soul builds systems for managing difficulty. Rhythms that keep the ground stable when the ground itself is unstable. patterns of thought and behavior that protect the interior from what is outside trying to get in, ways of moving through the world that are designed specifically for the conditions of a season that was asking too much. These adaptations are not weakness, they are intelligence. They are what allowed you to keep moving when moving required everything you had. But here is what always happens. The season ends, the survival structure does not. The walls built to protect the interior from a specific threat keep standing long after that threat is gone. The routines designed to manage difficulty keep running long after the difficulty has resolved. The ways of thinking constructed to limit exposure to pain keep operating long after the source of that pain has been removed. And slowly, without any single dramatic moment of recognition, the structure that preserved you begins to function as something else entirely, not a cage in any hostile sense. Something more insidious than a cage, because it looks exactly like the thing that kept you safe, and the nervous system does not voluntarily release what it has learned to identify as safety. But safety built for a version of reality that no longer exists is not safety. It is compression, and a structure built for a smaller version of your life than the one that currently exists is a structure that is actively limiting the size of what can enter it. The you that exists now is not the you that built those walls. You have been refined by what the hard season required, deepened by what the waiting season asked, moved through experiences that changed the interior of your life in ways that the survival structure was never designed to accommodate. The structure that kept you safe then is too small for who you are now, and on June 8th the Pisces dissolution completes what the hard season started, releasing the structure that was built for a past version of your reality so that the actual current version of your life can finally move into the space it was always meant to occupy. What breaks open is not something you will need to identify in advance. You will know it the moment it releases because of what it feels like, not like a loss. Like an exhale, like the sudden absence of an effort you had been making so automatically that you had stopped registering it as effort. Like a door opening in a room you had stopped remembering was sealed. Let it open. Do not reach for the architecture to close it again. The season that required that structure is done, and what stands on the other side of the opening is not a void. It is the size of your actual life, finally uncontained. The second thing the last quarter moon shock wave targets on June 8th is the truth you have been managing rather than living. This one is the interior shock, the one that does not announce itself with outer circumstances, but arrives as a sudden and complete clarity about something you have known at the level below the management for longer than you have been willing to admit you have known it. Because there is a specific kind of exhaustion that belongs only to one experience, and that experience is carrying two versions of something simultaneously. The version that is being maintained, presented, and managed, and the version that is actually true. The tiredness of this is unlike other kinds of tiredness. It does not come from working hard towards something that matters. That kind of tired carries satisfaction underneath it, a sense of progress, of effort going somewhere meaningful. The tiredness of managing a truth that has not yet been lived carries something entirely different underneath it. Friction, a low-level constant resistance in the direction of movement that matters most. Energy that cannot be applied to growth because it is entirely consumed by the work of maintenance. The background hum of existing in a carefully managed version of your own life rather than the actual version. Pisces under the last quarter moon does not support that maintenance. This is not metaphorical. The specific frequency of the Pisces dissolution actively withdraws the energy that makes the management feel necessary and sustainable. For a moment, and sometimes for much longer than a moment, the gap between the managed version and the true version loses the force that has been holding it open. The maintenance drops, and in the space where it was, the true version is simply present, unguarded, unfiltered, clear in a way it has not been clear in the waking hours for a very long time. That is the second shock, not because what is revealed is shocking. The truth that surfaces on June 8th is almost certainly not news to you at the soul level. It has been there, patient and consistent, and entirely unwilling to disappear regardless of how sophisticated the management around it became. The shock is its arrival in the unmanaged state. Its sudden presence in the full light of your own awareness without the buffer of the system that has been keeping it in the background. And what follows that arrival, if you stay with it rather than immediately rebuilding the container, is not chaos. It is energy returning. The vitality that was being consumed by the management floods back into your system the moment there is nothing left to manage. And you understand in that return how much had been quietly occupied by that work. Work that had become so habitual it had stopped registering as effort. Work that was simply the texture of daily existence in the managed version of your life. Write 1111 in the comments if you feel it right now. If the truth is already pressing closer to the surface than it was yesterday. If the management is already taking more energy than it was a week ago. You are not imagining that. The Pisces dissolution has already begun. By the time June 8th completes, the gap will have closed, and what you do with the clarity that follows will be the single most important choice this entire lunar cycle asks you to make. The third thing the wave hits is the connection or the closure that has been suspended in ambiguity. There is something in your relational world that is unfinished. Not unimportant, unfinished. You know what it is. The soul level of you has known what it is for longer than the conscious managing mind has been comfortable fully acknowledging it. A connection that has been circling the edge of something significant without landing into that significance. A conversation that needs to happen and keeps not happening. A bond that requires naming or releasing or fundamentally renegotiating, and has been held instead in the specific suspension of neither fully here nor fully complete. That suspension has a cost. It is paid continuously in small amounts, so regularly that the payment has become invisible, but the total is significant. The energy required to hold something in an ambiguous state, to keep the incompleteness from resolving in either direction, is energy that belongs somewhere else in your life, and the soul level of your relational world has been building, quietly and consistently, toward the moment when the cost of the suspension exceeds the cost of the resolution, when ambiguity becomes less tenable than clarity, when the energy required to hold things in the incomplete state becomes simply unavailable. June 8th is that moment. Pisces governs the layer of connection that exists below what is said and arranged and agreed to, the soul-level current between people, the frequency of what is actually present in a relationship before and beneath and beyond anything that has been explicitly stated. Under the Pisces last quarter moon, this layer becomes the dominant one. What has been managed at the surface becomes secondary. What is actually true at the soul level of the connection moves to the foreground. And what is actually true cannot, under this frequency, be kept in suspension. For some chosen ones, what arrives is the recognition that a specific person matters in a way that has not yet been fully acknowledged or moved toward. The connection that has been kept carefully at the level of almost, held in the safety of distance and uncertainty, suddenly and completely cannot be held there anymore. It has become too present, too real, too clear to be maintained in the comfortable ambiguity that has been protecting it from both its own weight and the risk of its own significance. For others, what arrives is the recognition that something being held out of loyalty or history or the specific hope that has been keeping it alive past its natural point of completion has in fact completed. The Pisces dissolution carries no cruelty in this. It carries a specific tenderness for what was genuinely real in what is ending. And alongside that tenderness, an absolute clarity that the ending is complete, that both people are ready for the release even if only one of them has yet consciously acknowledged being ready. The connection is not diminished by its completion. It is honored by the honesty of the naming. Whatever form this third shock takes in your specific life, the resolution that arrives on June 8th is the resolution that the soul level of your relational world has been building toward. The suspension was always going to end. This moon is simply the frequency that makes the continuation of that suspension no longer energetically possible. Now let me speak to something the last quarter moon in Pisces carries that almost no one writing about this lunar placement ever addresses, because this is the part that will determine whether the shock wave breaks you open or breaks you down. Chosen ones carry grief into significant spiritual events without fully realizing they are carrying it, not the fresh grief of a recent and nameable loss, the accumulated grief. The kind that does not attach itself to a single event, but lives in the body as a specific weight in the chest when certain thoughts arrive, as a contraction around certain possibilities that once felt wide open and have gradually, through the cumulative disappointments of real life, become careful and guarded. As the quiet interior distance between the version of yourself that existed before the hard seasons and the version that has been operating since. This grief accumulates without announcement. It builds in the small moments, not the large ones, in the individual instance of a hope that arrived differently than it was held, in the particular season that extracted more than felt proportionate and offered no visible acknowledgement of what it cost. In the version of yourself that entered a difficult period and emerged as someone who is simply not identical to the person who entered, and the unnamed mourning of what that means, a mourning that almost never gets fully processed because processing it requires a stillness that the pace of surviving rarely permits. The Pisces last quarter moon creates that stillness. It is one of the specific things that Pisces does in the lunar cycle that no other sign does in quite the same way. It opens a frequency in which grief that has been moving through the interior without a clear exit finds one, not through analysis, not through the verbal articulation of what was lost, through dissolution, through the specific Pisces function of making permeable what was sealed, opening what was rigidly held, allowing what has been contained too long in too compressed a space to finally and completely release. In the dream state tonight, under this moon, this release will often arrive without a clear narrative attached to it, as emotion that surfaces without an obvious cause, as tears whose origin is not a single event but the entire accumulation of the season, everything the journey has asked, and everything that was offered in response to that asking. If this happens in the early hours of June 8th, do not move immediately to explain it or attach it to a specific circumstance or determine whether it is proportionate to anything identifiable in your life. The managing mind wants to categorize what the Pisces moon is releasing, but what is releasing does not require categorization. It requires permission, simply the permission to move, and under this frequency, if you give it that permission, it will complete its movement on its own. What you carry out of June 8th is not diminished by what releases on the way through. It is clarified. The weight that was accumulated grief becomes, when it has been fully released, the specific depth that only a chosen one who has carried that weight and metabolized it completely can possess. The depth that cannot be constructed from theory or borrowed from another person's understanding. The depth that belongs only to the one who lived what created it, and then allowed the Pisces moon to complete the cycle by releasing it. Now let me tell you about the energy pattern on the day itself, because how this wave moves matters for how you receive it. The last quarter moon in Pisces does not build to a peak in the evening. It arrives. The way certain kinds of knowing arrive, not assembled piece by piece from incoming information but present all at once, complete, before you have had time to prepare a response to it. You may wake up on June 8th already feeling that something has changed, that the interior landscape is different from the one you were inside when you went to sleep, that some arrangement you had grown so accustomed to that you stopped consciously registering it has shifted in the hours when you were not monitoring it. This is normal for Pisces lunar events. The dream state is this moon's preferred working environment. The waning square has often done its most significant work before the waking mind comes online. In the waking hours, the shock arrives in the ordinary moments, not in ceremony. Not during a meditation or a ritual or a period of conscious spiritual attention, in the middle of something unrelated, in a conversation that begins about something else entirely, in a moment of stillness that was not planned as a moment of stillness. In the thought that surfaces between two other thoughts, completely unprompted, carrying a weight and a clarity that ordinary thoughts do not carry, This is the signature of the Pisces last quarter moon. It does not make an appointment, it arrives in the gaps, in the spaces between the managed moments of your day where the management briefly drops its guard and the truth moves through. When it arrives, there will be a reflex, the reflex to restore whatever is giving way, to find the familiar shape of the thing that is releasing and return it to the form it had before the wave moved through it. This reflex is fast and it is strong, and it will dress itself as responsibility, as stability, as the reasonable thing to do. It is none of those things today. Today the structure giving way is not malfunctioning. The truth surfacing is not an emergency requiring containment. The relational clarity arriving is not a crisis. All of it is the last quarter moon in Pisces doing precisely what this moon was always going to do. And the work of the chosen one who understands what is happening is not to restore but to witness, to pause in the space between the arrival of the unexpected and the response to it. To let what is opening remain open long enough to see what was being held inside. That pause is where everything the wave carried to you actually lands. Now, I want to speak directly to the chosen ones who have been inside a long season of waiting. Because the June 8th shock wave is carrying something specific and significant for the ones who have been holding a vision forward through a period that required more patience than felt fair or reasonable or sustainable, and who have kept holding it anyway. You know who you are. You have been doing the work in the absence of visible confirmation that the work is landing anywhere, setting intentions and releasing them. Showing up to a process that has not always offered clear evidence of its own coherence or direction. Continuing when continuing required a decision rather than a momentum. Asking, in the honest hours, whether the timing you have been trusting has a specific end, or whether waiting is simply the permanent texture of this particular pursuit. The June 8th shock wave is your answer, not delivered as an external event that dramatically confirms the waiting is finished, delivered as an internal shift, a change in the quality of how movement feels in your life, something that the body registers before the mind has words for it, the specific difference between pushing forward against resistance and being carried by something that is moving in the same direction you are moving. The direction has not changed. The quality of the movement has changed entirely. You will feel this before you see its evidence. The outer world takes longer to rearrange itself than the interior does. What arrives first is a sensation, not euphoria, not the dramatic relief of a long-awaited announcement, something quieter and in some ways more significant than either of those, something like the release of a held breath you had forgotten you were holding, like a weight shifting in the body from the place it has been sitting to somewhere outside of you. Like the strange and almost disorienting ease of moving in a direction that is no longer asking you to fight for it. That sensation is the signal that the waiting season has completed, that what comes next moves differently than what came before, not the same movement continuing into a new chapter. A different quality of movement entirely, one that the entire season of waiting was building toward and making possible, and that can only be received by someone who went through what you went through to arrive here. Here is what to do with June 8th. When the unexpected arrives today, and it will arrive, pause before you move to respond to it, not a long pause, the length of one full breath taken with full awareness. Let what is breaking open stay open for the duration of that breath before the reflex to restore it closes in. That pause is not passive. It is the most active thing you can do in the moment of the shock, because it is in that pause that the gift the wave carried lands rather than bouncing off the armor of the reflexive response. Write down what arrives, not in careful language, not in the constructed sentences of a journal kept for eventual reading, in the raw and immediate language of the first words that surface. Whatever becomes clear on June 8th, whatever stops being manageable and arrives instead as simply true, whatever you suddenly understand about the direction your life is moving or the step that belongs to tomorrow or the person who matters or the structure that has released, write it before the managing mind arrives and begins its negotiations. The window between the clarity and the management of the clarity is narrow. What you capture in that window is the most honest map of your interior reality that this entire lunar cycle will produce. Take one action before the end of this day. not the full implementation of everything that becomes clear. One thing, one small and real and irreversible movement in the direction the wave pointed. One step taken while the frequency of the last quarter moon is still fully present, and the release structures are still fresh, and the surface truths are still clear and unmanaged. That single action taken before the ordinary management reasserts itself is the confirmation that you received what the wave delivered, that you are moving, that the shock wave found its mark. Now I want to speak about what happens the morning after, because the shock wave does not complete its work on June 8th and then disappear cleanly. It leaves something behind, and what it leaves behind is not wreckage, it is space. And most chosen ones do not know what to do with sudden space, because the experience of sudden space is unfamiliar in a way that can initially feel wrong, can feel like loss or disorientation or the vertiginous sensation of ground that should be solid not being where the foot expected it. June 9th is the morning of the cleared field, and the cleared field looks different than the field that was full. It is quieter, it has less obvious structure. The routines that were part of the survival architecture may feel strange or unnecessary, or like they belong to a version of your day that no longer quite fits. The truths that were managed are now simply present, and their presence in the unmanaged state requires a different kind of relating to them than the careful distance the management provided. The relational clarity that arrived on June 8th is real, and it is permanent, and it is going to require something of you in the days that follow that the suspended ambiguity was successfully preventing from being required. The morning after the shock wave is not a morning for dramatic action. It is a morning for witnessing, for sitting in the cleared space without immediately filling it with the next version of what was released. The impulse to fill the space quickly is strong. The nervous system that spent significant energy maintaining the survival structure and the managed truth and the suspended connections does not immediately know what to do with the absence of that work. It will reach for something to replace what released, something to organize the space back into familiarity. Resist that reach on June 9th, not permanently, not forever, just for the morning. Just for long enough to understand what the cleared space actually contains, because the cleared space is not empty. It is full of what the compression was preventing from being visible, the possibilities that the survival structure was occupying the room of, the direction that the managed truth was consuming the energy of, the connections that the suspended ambiguity was holding the attention of. All of it becomes visible in the cleared space if the cleared space is given enough stillness to reveal itself before the next structure is built in it. What you see in the cleared space on the morning of June 9th is the map, the actual map of the season ahead, not the adjusted, managed, survival-structured version of that season, the actual version, the one the last quarter moon in Pisces cleared space for, the last thing, and it matters. The structures the June 8th shock wave releases were the right things to build. The truths that surface were protected for good reason during the seasons when protection was what they needed. The relational ambiguities that resolve were held in suspension by a wisdom that knew, even when the conscious mind did not, that the resolution required a specific kind of readiness that had to be built before the resolution could land properly. Nothing about the path that led you here was wrong. Nothing about the choices made in harder seasons should be read in the light of today's clarity as evidence of error. The path you took was the precise path that produced this moment, this readiness. This specific interior capacity to receive what the June 8th last quarter moon in Pisces is delivering. You did not take a wrong turn. You took the turn that leads here, and here is the shock wave that breaks you free. Here is the structure releasing and the truth surfacing and the ambiguity resolving and the grief completing its exit and the waiting season stepping aside for what it was always building toward. Here in the cleared space of everything the wave moves through is the beginning of the season that all of it was pointing at. The last quarter moon is rising in Pisces. The wave is already in motion. The ground is already shifting beneath the surface of your life. You have been feeling it for days. Now you know what it is. And now you are ready for what it brings.